I just want to make a couple quick comments, and then you've all had to listen to me several times before, actually, and I tell this is the truth, I tell every single group I get a chance to speak to, look, you all pay my salary, so you're allowed to ask any question you want, you're allowed to yell at me, we have this wonderful thing in this country called the First Amendment, and you're supposed to exercise it. You typically don't tell Americans that they need to do. They sort of get that. It's kind of instinctively. But make sure you do. So I'll keep it brief. Let me just set the parameters by saying this. The world is a dangerous and many times chaotic place. But it's a less dangerous, less chaotic place, in my judgment, when America leads. With the values and the principles that our country has historically stood for, it's a better place when we lead. And the truth is, you can't lead in a military sense, in a diplomatic sense, if you don't first lead economically. Just the way the world works. To be the military and diplomatic leader, you got to be the economic leader. And it's difficult to be the economic leader when you got the wrong policies in place. And I would argue right now, when you look at what's coming out of Washington, and I spent the whole day visiting with business leaders in the Richland County area. And every single one of them said, the uncertainty that comes out of Washington is making it. I mean, I've heard this for 2 years. I'm sure you've all heard it. If you were in business, you know it. The policies that are in place right now, or the lack of good policies that are in place, are making it difficult for us to grow our economy and create jobs and do the things that we need to do to really get our economy humming and moving again. And you can look at energy policy, the lack of a coherent energy policy, the lack of tax reform and a tax policy that makes sense. I got a colleague, freshman member of Congress from Green Bay, Wisconsin, Reed Ripple. I tell him the story all the time. One of these sharp guys in the freshman class. His office is right down the hall from mine. We've become friends. I've been in his office several times. On his desk, in his office, he keeps a copy of the tax code. And I mean the tax code. It's huge. It's ridiculous. And it's just to remind Reed why he came to Congress. What his focus is, we need to reform this tax code, lower the burden on Americans, make it simpler, get rid of all the different, credits, exemptions, all the different things in there. Make it a simple, fair, flatter tax system so it's more conducive to economic growth, job creation. But we got the wrong energy policy, wrong tax policy, wrong regulatory policy, and obviously our fiscal policy is as messed up as you can imagine. And that's frankly where I'm trying to spend the bulk of my time as your member of Congress, trying to focus on moving things towards a balanced budget, moving things in the direction that you all have to do. The good thing about that, I know we'll get into this debt ceiling debate here in a few minutes, but the one positive, the biggest positive I would argue that came out of this whole debate is now for the first time in 16 years in this country, we are having a true focus, true national discussion, true national debate on the need for a balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution. And as I said many times in the last month when we were in the heat of this debate on the debt ceiling, every family has to balance their budget, every small business owner has to balance their budget, every township, every county, every city. Where's the mayor? The mayor, you probably has to balance his budget. Mayor Banks, he's in the back. You probably have to balance your budget, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Every state, everybody has to balance their budget except, oh, by the way, that one entity that happens to have a $14 trillion debt, the federal government. So the fact that in the course of this debate, we're now having this renewed focus on the need for the politicians in Washington to do what everyone else in America has to do is a darn good thing. And the fact that we're going to have a vote. Now I don't know if we can get enough of the other party enough of the D's to go along with it, because you need a supermajority in the House and a supermajority in the Senate to get this thing sent out to the states for ratification. But at least we're going to know the score sometime this fall when we have the debate. And then you can build from there. And that's just the way politics works in America. You got to keep building, you got to keep making the case. And then the American people are always ahead of the politicians. The pressure from the people on the elected political class is such that you can actually get it done. And so that's the biggest positive that we move forward. My favorite, and I'll stop here and take your questions. That's only the second time I said that. I mean it this time. I will take your question here. My favorite verse in Scripture is 2 Timothy 4:7. I fought the good fight, I finished the course, I've kept the faith. And what a charge that we have as Americans to fight the fight, finish the course, keep the faith, and those principles, those basic principles that made us the greatest country in history. And if we do that, look, we've faced obstacles before, we've faced hurdles before, all kinds of impediments have been placed in the path of Americans, and we always figure out a way to get over them, get through them, do what it takes to get the job done. And I'm confident we can do the same thing again. And you're a big reason why. The energy you bring to the political process, the energy you bring to highlighting what needs to be done in this great country is so darn important. So let me again just thank you, and now your chance to yell at your congressman. So fire away. And are you the boss, Marianne? I figured you are. So you got the mic. So okay. So we got. I do have to get to another event tonight, but I got 40 minutes here, or 45 minutes that we can dialogue back and forth.
Are we working? Yes.
Congressman, I've heard you speak several times in Richland County, and I hear you often out of Washington. And there's one thing I appreciate: your message never changes.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. My wife, you're the same ugly guy in Washington that you are at home. Nothing changes. Yes.
Hi, Congressman. My question has absolutely nothing to do with debt.
Okay.
But something that concerns me very greatly, and I think a lot of other people as well. Federal official overreaches. I have seen time and time again where there's more cases of searches being done by police in certain areas like train stations or something. Children's lemonade stands are being shut down by government officials. One was a 4-year-old child. There was an 11-year-old girl was prosecuted for saving a woodpecker. I mean, the EPA and the FDA are so totally out of control, it's not even funny. And people are being harassed if they have a concealed carry license by some police. Obviously, this is really getting out of control, turning towards like a police state. What can be done about this?
Well, I mean, the good news is that those examples you talked about with law enforcement are the exception. The vast majority of our law enforcement are great Americans who are putting their life on the line, defending and protecting our communities. But I think what your point underscores is the reason you don't want big government, particularly at the federal level, is because when you get big government, that means there's going to be less freedom, less liberty. Just the nature of big bureaucracies. I always tell this story. This happened probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago now, maybe 4 months ago. A subcommittee I get the privilege of chairing in Washington deals with regulatory affairs. And we happened to have this a hearing, and we had a representative from OSHA in front of the committee. And in the course of this committee, I started to pick up on just what I would, I guess, term as this somewhat of an arrogant attitude from this particular federal official. And so I said, I'm just going to cut to the chase and you kind of just ask this guy what I thought was a pretty important question. It's sort of a pretty fundamental question. And so I said to him, and I kind of laid it on kind of thick, I said, well, now, sir, you would agree, though, that even though there may be some exceptions, I said, you would agree, wouldn't you, that the vast majority of employers care pretty deeply about their employees. I mean, after all, they know them, they train them, they're the reason they make a profit. I said, so you would agree with me, wouldn't you, that most employers care deeply about the safety and the well-being of the people who work for them. They know them, they may go to church with them, they know their families, their kids may go to school together. I said, so wouldn't you agree, and again, like I said, I laid it on pretty heavy. I said, wouldn't you agree with that statement? And this guy just couldn't help himself. There was a pause, and he said, I'd like to think so. With just, with an attitude, just like he's smarter. And so then he got me mad, and I said, oh, so let me get this straight. We had a member of our committee, Congressman Kelly from Pennsylvania, from Western Pennsylvania, who was in the car business. And I said, oh, so let me get this straight. You care more about Mr. Kelly's employees than he does? Well, then he started backtracking. But what it displayed is when you have big government, there's more likely you're going to get people like that in the bureaucracy who have an attitude that's not, frankly, the kind of attitude they should have when we're all paying their salary, when taxpayers are paying their salary. So most importantly, what we have to do, and this is why, again, that's why I mentioned it in my opening remarks, why we need a balanced budget requirement. If you got to live within your means, you can't deficit spend. You suddenly have to keep government within a confined, smaller governments, particularly at the federal level. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. So that's what we have to focus on as we're dealing with these concerns from a liberty and freedom standpoint. Well, I just followed the mic, I guess, and then we'll get it back. Right now, we have 3 in the front row. So
John Boehner is in his 10th term, I believe, as Speaker of the House. His #1 subordinate is Eric Cantor, who has 6 terms. The fact that you are presiding over this conservative caucus, should we consider you're starting to have some clout in this pecking order?
I don't know if I have any I don't know how much clout I have. I mean, I do know this. I mean, this is what I told y'all when I ran for the job back in 2006. There's certain things I believe in, certain things that I think are in the best interest of families, the key institution in our culture, certain things that I think are just in the best interest of our country, and I'm going to fight for them. And I will tell you that the speaker, and let me say this too. The speaker's got a tough job. I mean, it's not easy. He's the #1 Republican in the United States government, and he's got to deal with President Obama. He's got to deal with Harry Reid in the Senate. It's not an easy job. And the fact that this agreement, while I felt it did not go near far enough to solve the problem, the fact that there weren't tax increases in it, the fact that we did cut some spending, certainly not enough, but and the fact that because many of us conservatives pushed hard, the balanced budget amendment is now central to the entire debate and still in play as we move forward in the Congress. Those are positive things. And compared to what's taken place, I mean, think about the way it used to be with the debt ceiling vote. They just raised it. Well, we need to spend more, or just raise it. At least this time there was a debate. At least this time there was actual some reduction in spending. At least this time there was a focus on the fact that a cut, cap, and balance approach, which we advocated, would actually begin to solve the problem. I believe that would have actually, and others have said the same thing, would have prevented a downgrade. So the fact that we had this kind of debate used to be just automatic. So while I disagree with the final product and didn't support it, the speaker, there were some good things about the plan. It could have been worse, I guess, is the way we'd like to describe it. Now, with all that being said, remember what the plan did, the final plan. The final plan was, we got a $14 trillion debt. We increased the borrowing authority of the United States government to $2.4 trillion more, and we cut $21 billion in the first year. So to put that in family terms, the kid got a hold of the credit card. He went out and ran up the bill, $14,000. And he says, wow, that's just not enough. I need to spend more. All right? Teenagers think sometimes. So he goes to the bank and they say, all right, we'll give you $2,400 more, but you have to promise us over the course of the next year, you will spend $21 less than you had planned in your budget. So that's what the final deal really was. And that's why many of us said, look, it's a start. And it is. Compared to historically what we've done in Congress, it is a step in the right direction. But it's not the step we need. The window of time to fix this problem is closing rapidly. And it's like any other difficulty you face in life. The sooner you get after fixing it, the better it is, and typically the easier it is. And to me, it seems that's the attitude and the approach we have to take. Let me just give you one other number. We're currently spending $225 billion a year in interest to service this huge debt. Now, someone tell me about interest rates right now. Yeah, next to nothing. They're not just low, they're historically low. They can't go any low. They're going to go up, right? And let's just assume they go up modestly, not 1979, 80, 18, not crazy. Just they go up modestly, which is going to happen. They're going to go up some. So, $225 billion we're spending right now on interest. Within 10 years, interest rates going up just modestly, we will be spending more in interest than we currently spend on national defense. So now think about this. If you're spending more money to service debt than you are to defend your country, that's not a good thing. That is not a model that's sustainable. And frankly, back to what the framework I tried to set out here at the start, that's not the kind of economic picture you want so that you can remain the diplomatic and military superpower of the world and make the world a better place. It just doesn't fit. So that's what we're up against, and that's why it's so critical. And the good news is the conservative movement around the country helped send us a lot more conservative members this freshman class, a lot of guys who are willing to come there and understand what we just described and are willing to fight for it. And that's the positive thing I get. Who else we got here? Okay, yes, sir.
What I have to say, I hope, is constructive criticism.
Fire away. You pay my salary. Remember what I said.
No, that's not about you. But, what you just said about the credit card, to me, is the way things should be explained to the public. And I've always felt that Republicans so often talk to the public like they all had degrees in public finance and political science.
That's a nice way of saying they talk boring, right?
For example, now I don't agree with what the Democrats are saying, but when they say that we're going to push grandma off the cliff in a wheelchair, that's pretty easy for everybody to visualize. But when you say we need to get spending down to 18% of GDP, 75% of the people don't know what GDP means. So I think we're missing a lot of people when I say me, I think the Republicans are missing a lot of people when they speak above their ability. Yeah, I think we could do a much better job of telling it so that the average Joe six-pack knows what we're talking about.
I think I would disagree with one part of what you said, and that is I actually think most Americans are a lot sharper than the politicians who try to act like they're smart when they talk. So I think that people can get it, but the point is well taken. I mean, look, we're in the world we live in today, the high-tech information world we live in today. You better be able to communicate. You better be able to put two sentences together and communicate in a compelling way. And sometimes our party is guilty of not doing that. So we try to, at least I try to, say things in a way that I think makes sense, and in a way of a family out there who does have to balance their budget in a way they can understand it. And you're exactly right. We need to communicate. And one thing we also need to do this, and look, there's plenty of blame to go around in Washington about who this fiscal situation we're in. I mean, the debt. I mean, Republicans, let's be honest, and I love President Bush, but they spent too much money at the end of the last administration, and this administration has taken it to a whole new level, obviously. But one of the things I think is important, regardless of party is, don't demagogue on the, I mean, for example, this bothered me more than anything in the recent debate we had in Congress. When the President of the United States stood up and said to seniors, I'm not sure there's going to be the resources there to pay Social Security checks in the month of August. That's baloney. Everyone understood, everyone, including the White House, understood there was sufficient revenue coming in the month of August to pay the bondholders, to pay Social Security recipients, and to pay the troops in the field. So when the President of the United States should, I don't care if he's Republican, Independent, Democrat, I don't care what he or she is. When they stand up and speak to the American people, it shouldn't be to scare and play these kind of games with the Americans. It should be to reassure American people. And frankly, I would be just as critical of the Republican today. You're the president, you're the commander-in-chief. When he says that, when he stands up and says that about Social Security, he's also saying to spouses of our troops who were fighting for defending our country, well, you cannot get paid. That whole message gets communicated, and that is just plain wrong. It's one of those things that bother me more than anything in this whole debate. All right, who's next? I'm sorry. I'll try to not answer so long when we get to more questions.
You know, the Republicans talk about trimming programs, and this is going to hurt them bad. Once people get used to these programs, they're going to want it. The Democrats want to tax the hell out of this. But nobody ever talks about waste, fraud, and abuse. I had some experience with the federal government and certain agencies, and there's a tremendous amount of it. I would estimate 20% of our budget is waste, fraud, and abuse. And I don't hear anybody talking about this. And I really think, I was familiar with the Labor Department. They had a handful of people to go out and look for waste, fraud, and abuse when they have billions of dollars to spend. Once the money is appropriated, the administrators in Washington could care less. And I'd rather raise taxes or cut programs. I think there's a golden opportunity to eliminate waste and abuse.
Yeah. No, well said. There's Senator Coburn from Oklahoma had the government accounting office look at government and look at basically the overlap, the redundancy in the waste in the federal government, and huge hundreds of billions of dollars, according to this study, could be saved if you get at that question. Well, one area we focused on is the area of welfare reform, and we're working with the Heritage Foundation on this. 69 different means-tested social welfare programs that your tax dollars support. Now, I mean, when you think about it, there were like, we listed them out, there were like 10 different nutritional programs. There were 11, 12, I forget, 14 different educational programs. There were X number of job training programs. And then certain healthcare. I mean, It's amazing. And so if you really want to help families, which Americans do, I mean, we're the most generous people on the planet. We want to help people. If you really want to help them, you'd probably help them more if you didn't have 69 different programs, right? You just had a couple that actually met the needs of the family who's in a tough situation. And so our bill, working with the Heritage Foundation, tries to get at just what you described in the area of mandatory social welfare spending. But those things all have to take place. Now, here's the key. This is why I'm so focused on the need for the country to truly do what, to use an overused term, the game changer, get this balanced budget requirement done. Because once the politicians have to actually live within their means, well then guess what? You have to start looking at all these programs and saying, okay, which ones are redundant, which ones make sense, which ones are helping people, which ones are a total failure, which ones are a total waste, and you have to make decisions. But the catalyst to force the politicians and the political class to make the decisions is the requirement to live within your means. If they can just keep spending and the band plays on, you keep raising the debt ceiling, spending more money, okay. So it's why that is a fundamental change that I think ultimately, long-term, secures the country. All right.
We're going over the cliff. There's no more games. It's done. It's toast. If we can make a change in 2012, can you please give us a strategy? What can we do? Where can we go? How can we get this change?
No, you said it. I mean, look, it's how we decide things in the greatest country ever. We decide them at the ballot box. And your comments are right on target. The next election is critical. I mean, look, politicians stand, you've heard this as many times, just like I have. Politicians stand up all the time and say the next election is the most important election in the world. Well, this is actually probably the time that it's true. Think about this. If President Obama is reelected, then Obamacare is going to become the law. I mean, it's the law now, but it's going to be fully implemented. There's a Supreme Court, and I appreciate the cases that move it, and we may win there. But that's part of this uncertainty that's hanging out there that's making it tough on the job creators and the entrepreneurs to do the things that we normally do. So the next elections, that's how we decide things in the country. You have elections. And look at the impact the conservative movement's had around the country in this last election. The fact you took back the House of Representatives. No one thought that was going to happen. You did it. And many of these folks who've come in, I work with them. The vast majority of that freshman class are members of the Republican Study Committee. There's some tough, good, wonderful people in that. These guys from South Carolina votes as a delegate, and it's amazing. It's like the old days in Congress. They vote as a delegate. These guys are conservative guys. There's some good folks, and so it's done at the ballot box. And there are a number of Senate races around the country where we can elect more conservatives. And whoever our nominee is, we got to get behind him or her, whoever it is, and make sure that they win next November. So that's how we do it. And then once Republicans get in, you got to keep doing the job American people are getting great at doing. Hold them accountable, and they can do what they said they were going to do. And say, look, and here's what needs to happen. You need cut, cap, and balance. The plan we put, you need to cut spending, you need to cap it, you need this balanced budget amendment. You got to have those things. You got to have them. But you also need the fourth component. And this is what Reagan understood, this is what Kennedy understood, this is what Kemp understood. You need cut, cap, balance, and growth. You've got to have a growing economy. And so Kennedy did this, Reagan, they understood. You start turning this ship in the right direction, the fiscal ship in the right direction. Get it on this is where Paul Ryan's exactly right. Get it on the right path, and then get out of the way and let the American people, the entrepreneurs, the small business owners. This is the family we met here in town and opened up the bed and breakfast.
Brad and Karen Smith.
Brad and Karen Smith. We just met them. They're going to open up a bed and breakfast, and right here in God's country. Americans will do all kinds of things if you get government. They were talking about all the hassles they got to deal with government, getting the permits to open their bed and breakfast. Yeah. They just talked to us. So you just got to get the ship turned in the right direction, and then look out. This country will do what it's done for 200 plus years. But that's the key. And so it really is about laying the predicate and the groundwork for framing this campaign over the next 14 months in such a way that conservatives will win next November. And part of framing it, this is why I'm enthused about this balanced budget focus. Part of framing it is when we have this vote this fall, and a whole bunch of the other party votes against it, and the president stands up. The President of the United States stood up, can you believe this? During the debt ceiling debate, the President of the United States stood up and said, we don't need a balanced budget amendment for us to do our jobs. Really? I mean, that would be, frankly, we would all, it would be hilarious if it wasn't so serious. Really? Look at the last 40 years. Right? I mean, so that's, you get this thing headed the right direction. That's the key. Once you turn it, that sends a message to the market. It sends a message to entrepreneurs. It sends a message to consumers. It sends the message you need the market to receive. And that's when good things happen. So, again, it's happened time and time again. We need it to happen quick this time because it's tough. I mean, you underscored that in your comments. All right, here, and I got
Yes. My question is what are we going to do about the government promoting all these entitlements? Or instead of helping people maybe with a low-paying job, they tell them, no, you just go on welfare and we'll pay for everything.
Yeah.
And I work 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet, and I have no problem complaining about that. My problem is I am tired of my neighbor watching me get up and go to work every day while my taxes are paying for his free entitlements.
Yeah. You know what? Every business owner we met with, every business owner we met with today, and we met with half a dozen. They all said, and they were all hired. It was very encouraging, and this was largely in the manufacturing sector we met with in the Mansfield area. They said we would hire people if we could get them. Yeah. I mean, Mark Robichuk told me that there are, he believes, approximately 300 positions open in the manufacturing area, in the Mansfield area, that they're looking to fill spots for. And part of it's driven by the incentives the policymakers put in place to encourage the wrong kind of behavior.
Yeah.
I mean, I always point, this is one of the reasons we're working on this welfare reform bill, because there was good welfare reform done back in the mid-90s. But unfortunately, we've now kind of moved the system back to those old incentives that were in place. And in particular, I always use this example. Think about what the welfare system says to the young unwed mother. Don't get married, don't get a job, have more kids, and you get more money. So that is, you talk about an anti-family, just the wrong messages to be sending. So that's why, again, if you got to limit the size of government, you got to limit within your means, you got a better chance of putting in place the right policies. To keep government more constrained, putting in the policies that encourage and reward the work ethic, that encourage doing things the right, that encourage and promote family, do things the right way. So that's what we got to focus on. Okay, I don't know where the mic is, so just keep standing up and going.
Yes, Jim, I guess my question is, well, you had mentioned that we need to get more conservatives in Washington, and I'm all in agreement for that. I think our biggest challenge possibly to that, though, are going to be some of the Republicans that we already have in place, right? I mean, we're so thankful to have you there, but we're hearing the rumors about the fact that they're going to try to redistrict your district, so you have payback for you not wanting to pay them. I was just curious what your comments were on that, and if that is true, what we can do to help make sure that doesn't happen, and what your game plan is.
Well, I appreciate the...
I think if it is true, all hell would break loose.
Look, as I assume most of you know, Ohio's losing 2 seats, so we're going to go from 18 representatives from Ohio in Congress to 16. So obviously the districts are going to have to change. They're all going to have to get bigger as far as population goes, and many of them get bigger in the area you have. It's done by the General Assembly. And so the House and the Senate will put together a bill. They're having hearings. They'll put together a bill which describes the map. And the governor will sign it and after they vote on it, and that will become the district. And it's likely to happen sometime in the next 8, 10, 12 weeks. I'll be just, I said this to everyone, I'll be just totally frank with you. I'm not losing any sleep over it. You know, look, they're going to draw a map. We're going to take a look at the map and we'll make a decision. And I hope the 4th district is largely what it is now. I'd love to continue representing folks in West Central and North Central Ohio. I hope that's how it works out, but if it doesn't, we'll examine the facts when they're put in front of us and we'll make a decision. But we'll be ready. I mean, look, it's one of the reasons, one of the reasons you raise money in a campaign and you go out and talk to folks and you understand what's on people's minds is one of the reasons you do your job the way you do your job. So we'll wait and see. All right, Marianne's got the mic. So just stand up and fire away and we'll try to go quicker, but I got 20 minutes.
I'm kind of offended by the way that I hear people talk about welfare, women on welfare, and the baby boomers. And we're talking about Americans, and yet no one seems to be talking about the millions of Mexicans here that pop out 300,000 babies every year, and you have no problem taking American tax dollars to pay for that. I got a list here of 6 people who were murdered in the past 4 days by three illegal Hispanic aliens. And I was upset why I continue to hear Americans, baby boomers, have paid into this system their entire life.
Yeah.
And we've got 6 people that were killed. This young woman up here was talking about how we have restrictions on us. We have to pay our taxes. We have to obey the law. But we see millions of illegal Hispanic aliens. I've read story after story in the past few days where this one illegal Mexican came here 11 years ago, admits he's here illegally, and while he was here down in Florida, he organized other illegals to march in our streets and to make demands of our government, and they're getting it. But we've got 47 million Americans on food stamps, and 30-some million Americans unemployed and underemployed. And all these Americans you're talking about that are out of work, some of them are losing their homes. Right. And whether they take a minimum wage job, they're not going to be able to keep their homes. But anyway, I'll get back to the subject of illegal immigration. 300,000 children born every year to illegal immigrants. And that cost, we pay for it, okay? I have no problem talking about what we're going to do as an American family to cover a deficit, but until I hear you guys start talking about, this entitlement, where mostly Mexico, 70% of illegals come from Mexico, until I hear you taking from them, please start talking about what you're going to do. And this anti-American bigotry towards my people called Americans, who are just good people who are doing the best they can right now. But anyway, thank you for the floor. But we're Americans, and we should be helping Americans first, sir. And thank you. And if they try to take your district away from you, I'll be there.
No one argues that there are Americans in a tough situation. Our economy, 9% unemployment, and there are families who are, through no real fault, in a tough situation. And look, we all want to help people, etc. But there are people who are, I would argue, probably abusing the system.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. But the point about the illegal immigration issue, I've said this many times. Let me back up and say this. I don't take many trips on the taxpayer dime. I've been to Iraq back in my first term, been to Anwar to see where we should be drilling for oil, and I've been to the border. I just don't think you should be taking a whole bunch of trips on taxpayer dollars. But when we're at the border, we saw that the fence works. It does. And we saw what needs to happen down there. And this is one of those issues where, like with everything, if you adhere to the right principles, you'll arrive at the right policy. And the right principles are respect the rule of law, enforce the law, right? The fence works, so let's secure the border. It's a national security concern, particularly in light of what just happened with this Fast and Furious issue and the Border Patrol issue. So it's critical for national security as well. So enforce the law, have respect for the law, and when you do that, also, and this is important, I think, for us conservatives to clearly communicate. Clearly communicate this. We want the rule of law, that's critical. But we also want to make sure we never, or the language we use is, we want to welcome people here. This is the greatest country in the world. But they need to learn our language. They need to be a part of our culture.
Yeah.
I shared this story last night, and I just had to think of it when I got a similar question last night over in Wapakoneta, Ohio. I've had my background's in wrestling, so I had the opportunity to travel to what was then the Soviet Union. And I tell folks, you go to places like, I've been to Cuba twice, been to the Soviet Union to compete, and when you go to places like that, you thank the good Lord to live here. I jokingly tell people, I was in Moscow in February. Moscow in February, it's like 400 below zero. I mean, and the food was terrible. So you go to places like that where you appreciate this great country so much more, and you understand why people want to leave those kind of systems to get in a system where liberty and freedom means something. And so we should always be the United States of America says, welcome. And it shouldn't, frankly, take 15, 20 years for someone who does want to learn our language, who does want to be a part of our culture, who wants to be an American. It shouldn't take them forever to become a citizen. But they got to do it legally. So, to me, those principles make so much sense. You would think that the political class could make sure that that's how the policy gets implemented. And that's what we have to focus on as we move forward. Many of the Hispanic families who truly want to come here and want to do it the right way, they have conservative principles and values. They believe in the same things that we all believe in. So, but they got to do it legally. That's the fundamental thing. The rule of law matters, and it should be respected.
Thank you for coming to this meeting, or holding this meeting for us. We appreciate the opportunity to speak our minds. When you started the evening, you talked about tax reform for business, as well as for the consumer. And I've been a business owner for the last 27 years in this community of Central Ohio. And when I came here in 1984, the economic situation was a little bit worse than it is right now, because that's when businesses were leaving the North Central Ohio area. And I'd remind folks, we had 21% interest and we had 19% unemployment.
That's right.
So things can get worse. But what I'd like you to do is to dig a little bit deeper into the tax reform issue for businesses, as well as the individual.
No, great question.
And give us a scan on what your policies are, or what your reform ideas are. And you have the toughest wrestling match of your lifetime going on right now.
Well,
thank you.
No, that's a great point. When I talk about cut, cap, balance, and growth, the growth component, central to the growth component for the country, in my judgment, is tax reform. And while I'm not a fan of the super committee, I think Gingrich had it right. If you watched the debate a couple of weeks ago, Republican presidential debate, Gingrich said it best. He said the super committee is supposed to be the United States Congress, for goodness sake, not this 12-month thing. But the one thing I'm hopeful of, and our Senator Portman has talked about this, true tax reform, not tax reform like the left wants, which is tax increases, more of your money so the government can spend more and run more of our lives, but tax reform that actually, and the right word to use is fairness. I mean, here's two things that drive Americans crazy. First, that close to half the population doesn't pay income tax. Now, most of those people are working, so they're paying some payroll tax, we get that. But when half the population is not paying the income tax, that's not a good thing, and that bothers Americans, as it should. And then what else bothers Americans is when companies like GE aren't, even though we got the highest corporate tax in the world, the different credits and exemptions and everything else that the lobbyists and the politicians got together and did, GE's not paying taxes. So it's a fairness issue, not fairness like the D's always talk about, like, well, fairness means, wealthy and business owners pay more, but fairness in the true sense of the word. So from a fairness standpoint, what we need is a flatter tax system that actually reduces the overall burden on Americans. Not one that raises it like the left wants, but one that actually makes the tax burden lower, but structure it and frame it in a way that's conducive to job growth. And so that everyone knows, again, getting rid of some of the uncertainty out there. So we're looking at a kind of moving towards a flat tax approach, keeping probably just a few basic credits that I would argue are pro-family. I mean, dependents, you should get a credit for kid. I mean, that's pro-family, so keep that in place. Keep the mortgage interest deduction in place, your home, for your primary rent for your home. That makes sense, that's pro-family. Maybe keep in place the charitable deduction. Americans are giving people, encourage that. So, but that's the kind of system you want to move to. And there are all kinds of studies, the American Enterprise Institute, Heritage Foundation, all kinds of groups have put together. This makes good economic sense and will be conducive to job creation. But it's built in a fair, free market type approach, which is, again, consistent with American principles. That's where we got to go. Gentleman in the back.
Congressman Joe Sonato, City Councilman from Ontario and retired postmaster of Mansfield. I'd like to thank you for having Ray at the town hall meeting yesterday evening. Two facts I would like to share with you. We cannot afford to lose one job in Richland County, let alone 100 jobs that were discussed last night. And the service angle of closing the Mansfield Mill processing down is terrible most of the mail from Mansfield goes south, not Cleveland. It goes to Columbus, Marion, Lima, Toledo, and that service is going to change from overnight to 2-day service. The only improvement to service is to Youngstown and Steubenville. We don't send 600 letters to those offices as opposed to 12,000 letters every night to Columbus. We really need your support, and we already have Senator Portman and Senator Brown's commitment on that also, so I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your service. Yes, thank you.
It's been alleged, though, that I'm also the North Central District Vice President for NARP, Federal Retirees. It's been alleged that you favor cutting federal jobs by 10%. I would like you to address that issue.
Well, look, let's just be frank.
Okay.
There's no way moving forward, you are going to have to look at the size of government. And when you look at the size of government, that does involve bureaucrats and federal employees in Washington, D.C. So you have to begin to say, and there are ways to get there. Again, there are sensible ways to get there. For every 2 employees that retire, you don't hire 2 back, you hire 1 back. Or, pick the ratio, so there are ways you get there that make sense. Treat the taxpayers with respect, and frankly also treat federal employees who serve their country working 20, 30, 40, whatever number of years they work, treat them with respect. So there are ways to get there. Our budget proposal that we put forward looked at those kind of things. We looked at also, we looked at things like the federal government fleet of cars. Do we really need all the, and I forget the number, but it was some number that, are you kidding me? Let's cut that in half. You have to look at everything. And this is one thing that, there's one proposal that's out there that's kind of intriguing. And many people like, and I think it has some merit. And it's a proposal by Congressman Connie Mack from Florida. And he basically says, all right, let's just, look, we're in a tough situation. Let's cut 1% a year. And let's ratchet down, and it's shared sacrifice. It's congressional offices get cut, in addition to we've actually cut already, but we need to cut more. Everybody from there to every single part of the federal government ratcheted down. There's some merit to looking at those kind of things. So yeah, you're going to have to look at employees. This is also similar to the budget that the Republican conference that we all supported, which basically says if you want to save Medicare, then you're going to have to begin to change it for younger Americans. Now, if you're at or near retirement age, you should be able to stay in the system exactly the way it is because you planned your life around that. You made decisions and you structured your portfolio and your life and and how you handle things, your finances around this certain set of rules. And it's not fair to change the rules in the middle of the game. But for younger Americans, if you want to make sure the system's still there, you're going to have to change it. So that's the way you deal with that. But certainly you're going to have to, over time, say we can't have as many federal employees. You're going to have to begin to reduce that. We have on the term limit, I actually support term limits. The Supreme Court has said that, I supported in 1992 when the state of Ohio passed the term limit bill. We now have term limits for State House, State Senate. We actually passed it, if you remember, in 92, we passed it for Congress too. The Supreme Court said you can't have one state with limits and another state not. So in order to fix the term limit thing, at the federal level, you need a constitutional amendment. I would argue that may be necessary, but I think what's more necessary is a balanced budget amendment. It's tough to get 2 amendments done at the same time, so we're going to focus on the balanced budget. But I think it's fine. And you might lose some good people, but on balance, I've just found in politics, newer, fresher faces coming into politics is typically a good thing. So I'm fine with it. Supported it, like I say, for the state of Ohio. But I would argue this too. This is what elections are. Look, you don't necessarily need everyone, or you don't necessarily need some supermajority number in the Congress that thinks exactly like we do. You need enough members in Congress who can persuade the others to come along. Now, I mean, think about the best example that comes to mind is the founders. Not everyone in the country supported starting this new grand experiment, freedom we call America. In fact, most Americans were, when you add those who were neutral and those who were against, there were more of those than there were who were for independence. So the conventional wisdom at the time was, it can't be done. It got done. Here we are today in the United States of America. So time and time again, people said Americans couldn't do something, and that our government couldn't do something. I mean, we're getting what's now. 70 years ago this December, when World War II started, when that thing started, it looked pretty tough for this country. I mean, who thought, really, Japan just attacked Pearl Harbor, we're gonna beat the Japanese, beat the Germans, I mean, the Nazi Germany, the power, but Americans did it. And you need enough who understand and are committed to making the changes that need to be made. And you can bring the rest along. It's happened, that's what leadership is. It's happened time and time again. And I'm convinced, I mean, maybe you're right. Maybe realism is such that it's not gonna happen. But I just refuse to believe, I just think when you look at the history of this country, we're still the greatest nation ever, we're still the biggest economy in the world, we still got wonderful people who get it. And frankly, think about the press today. I use this example all the time here because, you know, we conservative, all the press, they're always against us. You know, the New York Times doesn't like conservatives. They don't, trust me, they don't. But think about this, 2 20-year-olds and a video camera brought down Acorn. I mean, it's amazing. The entrepreneurial spirit. There's a great book out there, Arthur Brooks, who heads the American Enterprise Institute, wrote this book called The Battle. And he makes the moral case for why free markets in a freedom society makes so much sense, and why morally it's better to have that kind of market, that kind of culture. And he talks about, he even makes he says there are some who argue, I don't know if this is the case, but he makes the point that there are some people who argue that it's just built into Americans. You think about the folks who started our ancestors. They told them in Europe, you're going to do things a certain way, particularly with your faith. And they said, we're going to get in a boat, we're going to sail across this big ocean, and we're going to practice our faith the way we want to. And then they got to this country and said, we're going to go clear across this continent, and we're going to make this good. I mean, there's just this attitude that's in Americans. And so, I know it's tough, I know it looks, you know, particularly when you watch some of the politicians, but look, we can get it done. You know, and look, the inspiration you all should get is look at this room. We're all just regular Americans who say, like, let's make a difference in our country. And the next election is going to be, I think America's going to show up in a big way, and you're going to see some big changes that are going to help turn this thing around and get us back on the path and beyond. So, thank you so much for a chance to do it.